Okay, hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this last 2020 virtual DDD. We got a whole bunch of people with us today. It's going to be an Ask Me Anything fishbowl. So that means everyone who's in Zoom can either raise their hand and then we'll drag you in and you can ask your question live, or you can use the Q&A, and people watching on YouTube, you can also ask your question there. So without further ado, let's do an introduction round. Let's start on my top left, which is Alberto. A quick 10-second, 20.
Hello, everybody. Not so much to introduce. This is the stuff I do, I guess. I have no idea what you meant with introduction, so we'll just keep it short. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Vladik.
Hey, my name is Vladik, and I'm also happy to be here. And I'm probably my biggest contribution to domain-driven design is this cardboard right here.
You don't have the upgraded version yet.
No.
Oh. Thanks, Sophia. You're up.
Hey, hi, I'm Jofi. I'm also happy to be here, obviously. I'm a product manager, and I think I pass over.
Yeah, to Michael. You're up next.
Hello, everyone. Michael from Germany here. I'm a consultant, and I'm very happy to be here as well. Passing over.
Yeah, to Marco.
Hi, I'm Marco. I'm a trainer and consultant from Germany. I love domain-driven design and I can't shut up about it. So I'm very happy to be here and to talk a lot about my favorite topic.
Thanks. Amanita, if I pronounce your name correctly.
Aminata, no problem. Aminata. Yes, thanks. I'm Aminata. I'm from Cologne, Germany. I'm also a consultant and I'm focused on product development and human-computer interactions and user experience design. Yes.
Good. Thanks. Christina.
Also from Cologne, Germany. Nice to meet you. And I'm software developer, DDD addict, and happy to get us all here with help from Kenny.
Thanks. Kim.
Hi, everyone. This is Kim Gao. I live in Taiwan, and this is my first time to be here to enjoy the time with you. Basically, I am cloud architect working in AWS. And for now, my most passion is to speak ubiquitous languages with my kids, which they are 4 years old, 6 years old, and almost 1 year old. Yeah, kudos for the 3 babies father, okay?
Thanks, Trond. You're on mute, which is the word of 2020. Thanks. Counter 1. There you are.
I had to mute myself because my internet is going up and down. So I'm screaming at my kids. Now, Trond from Oslo here. Yes, I feel like a bit of odd man out. The imposter syndrome is kicking in heavily because I come more from a SOA background more than DDD. So, but I've done DDD for years. So, but I'm not on. I haven't written any books yet.
Thanks. Me neither. Alexei, you're up.
Hi, I'm Alexei, and I work as dev advocate to Venstore and as chief architect in a small Norwegian company called ABAX. So as a Tron, I live in Norway, and that's my contribution to DD. Probably some of you have seen it. Recently signed a contract to do 2nd edition after a lot of hesitation and regrets and fears, but hope it will see the light of day in July, maybe August next year.
Nice, thanks.
It will not be called .NET Core, it will be called Domain Design and Event Sourcing with .NET. Or C# maybe, I don't know. So it will be more agile. Event sourcing content.
Make it
I'm doing mostly event sourcing, so that's...
Kenny Romeo is waiting.
Thanks. Oh, he's waiting in the attendees. Okay. Dawn.
He's waiting on his.
Yeah, hi. Tron, I'm with you. I haven't written a book on DDD. I'm still reading up on the material. I'm chemist stroke software developer stroke designer. So I guess I'm in good company in terms of mixing all the metaphors and disciplines and everything else. So that's me, handing over.
Thanks. Yeah, so while I'm inviting Romeo, he'll probably join soon. Let's start. So the way it works, people who are on the attendees on Zoom, they can raise their hands and you can ask your question live in the fishbowl, and you can have a discussion with some of us. Since there's no raising hands yet, what I will do is I'll pose a question, and then the first people raising their hands at the panel list, they will start the discussion and we'll go from there. Okay, so let's pick a first question, which is an interesting one. What's the best way to introduce a new team to DDD if you have no experience at all? Or in my case, I have experience using DDD, but not with event storming or other collaboration techniques. So who of you raising your hands in the panelists wants to start with that? So how to introduce DDD. So I see Marco. See Michael. One more? Oh, you can start. So what do you think? And we have Vladik. Go ahead.
And Dawn was raising a hand unvirtually.
Oh, then Dawn as well.
So yeah, I usually have two different ways how to approach this. This is if it's very developer centric, and you need to get the culture going to talk about the language of the business and to introduce how focusing on language actually makes your system better, then I would start with value objects as like the lowest hanging fruit for domain-driven design. Just introducing value types or value objects in your code makes your code immediately more readable, and type safety as a present basically for free. And then the next time you talk about it with business people or with other programmers, you already speak a bit of the language of the business, and adapting refactoring to deeper insight as a refactoring pattern makes it a continuous learning thing that gets ingrained into your culture step by step. So that is if it's very technical heavy, technology heavy. If you already have a bit more trust in the people, or if there's more trust in the system, then doing event stormings, even if you're not doing it right, because there is no right way, right? But doing a collaborative exploratory modeling where you use sticky notes to represent things that happen in your domain and to foster a dialogue between business people and technical people is the most valuable thing you can do to introduce people to domain-driven design. Because immediately developers stop talking about databases, they start talking about the business value, and the business people don't want to tell you how to build a system, but they try to make the model work, try to make the story be coherent. And it really triggers the storytelling part or storytelling nature of humans. So those are the two different methods I would use if you do it at the very first step. Event storming and storytelling from the business side of things, and value types as a technical first step.
Cool. Michael, Vladik, or Dawn, any other ideas?
Yeah, I'll kind of jump onto what Marco said. My audience are not technical, so I would definitely, even pre the storming, talk a lot about the boundaries and where things belong and which bucket things are in. I use buckets tons of times because then people understand that, okay, does that belong over in the storage, or is that process, or is that something that someone will do? And what I found that really works is almost getting teams or projects or whatever they're doing to almost create their own agreed language. It's usually a mishmash of the technical plus the business plus whoever else is present. But once you have that consensus, then you can almost introduce anything new because the foundation has been built by the entire team and they feel like they own it, and then they're open to talk about and stretch in other directions. So it's do it and then name it afterwards would be the way. And I think it's just because I'm working with teams who are not necessarily mature in those processes. If you start defining, you spend all the time talking about what it is instead of actually doing it. So do first and explain later. That's what I do.
Yeah. I fully agree with what Marco and Dawn said. What I usually do is that I, first of all, try to observe the culture of an organization as well. So how are they dealing with product development? How much of a product perspective do they have? How do they deal with agile stuff? Yeah, how do they work in iterations? Do the developers already talk a lot to the business or not? And from those observations, I then start introducing things. What I am very always hesitant is that I try to directly introduce some idea or method with a name, because I'm always a little bit afraid of the cargo culting that goes ahead with that. So I rarely try to invite for event storming workshops. So I usually use more general names. So let's talk together. And my usual starting point is getting the development teams and the business talking to each other on a regular basis. I rarely am in contact with those things from a plain development perspective. So I agree with Marco that the idea with the value objects is a good one. Yeah, and I think I would do that as well. So I'm mostly sticking to the second part of what Marco said and trying to get people talk to each other. But I try to avoid pitching DDD as a term too often to the people, because then you run into the silver bullet problem, and that's something we don't want to do.
Yeah, so don't mention DDD is what you say. I think Vladik was up next, and I see other people raising their hands, and we're going to get to that. But Vladik?
Yeah, so I want to expand on Marco's answer. So for me, event storming is like the best gateway drug to domain-driven design. Because, when you want to make some change in the organization, you need management support. And the best way to acquire management support is to use event storming, because once you're doing it, it's like suddenly everybody is excited, everybody is getting value out of it. Because usually, if it's a brownfield project, no one has a clue what's going on there, and suddenly you're giving them this present. And you can also use this present event storming to explain what is ubiquitous language. You can demonstrate what is a bounded context, and the same for aggregates. And once management, they see that value, well, so it will be much easier, to make the shift to implementing domain-driven design, like more concepts from domain-driven design. So these are my 5 cents.
Thanks. So we're letting go of the fishbowl already. I see a bit. So next up, who was raising their hands is Alexei. So we'll just do the raising hands and see where it hits off. Maybe we'll get into a heated discussion at one point. That's fine. Alexei, you are up next on raising your hand.
Yeah, I have experience working with product companies mostly. So something like multi-tenancy, not the business writing software for their own use. So, and there is always something already exists. And then you have a team that works with the software that works and brings money already to the company. So almost inevitably, they already have this legacy monolithic software, the most popular pattern in the world, Big Ball of Mud. And surprisingly enough, developers sometimes see more value in bringing new concepts than the product people, for example, because they just want new features. That's understandable. So what I try to do first for developers, if I coach developers, I push them to challenge product, because product wants features. They say, oh, we want this feature, we want that feature, we want this button, we want that. And most of the time, product sometimes comes with a solution up front, because they think they know what the customer wants in terms of how it needs to be done. And I urge developers to challenge the product and actually ask questions. What kind of problem we're trying to solve? What is the customer value we're going to bring? And is this the most efficient way to do that? I keep giving examples that product wants a new report because customer wants a new report, but customer doesn't know anything better. So developers can be creative and more innovative and provide more interesting solutions. Another thing on the developer side, again, I bring them, I explain the concept of a model, that a model doesn't represent the whole world, because that's what monolithic systems do. They try to put the real life into their model, into the software, into very nitty-gritty details, are all in one place. All the details about the whole world that they're dealing with is in one place. And from introducing the model, I try to move on further to bounded context, because I don't talk about bounded context, whatever term we use. I basically use isolated models that only care about the particular business case that they solve, and focus the model. And then people see how things they don't care about, they disappear. And they see how things they work on stop getting in conflict with things that other people are working on. Although they work in the same domain, but they work in different contexts. And there was a lot of confusion about domain, subdomain context and stuff like that. And I think it's pretty clear. And I think I managed to explain it to quite a few teams. So that's the thing. I'm not afraid of bringing conflict between developers and product and customers, because I think conflict is a source of innovation. Without conflict, there is no innovation. I have never seen innovation in consensus. In discussions, there is something valuable that emerges, and disagreement and discussion always brings something new. Novelty comes from unexplored places. It rarely comes from everyone agreeing on everything. Then there is no novelty. Like it's a known thing. We kind of know what to do. So that's just my 5 cents.
Thanks. Alberto was up next, and go ahead.
Mute. Well, actually, most of the things after those were already sorted out. I just add 2 things, like domain-driven design is not necessarily a solution. So I need to do something like a big check. Even storming might be a way, or might be a retrospective, or something to understand what is the real problem, because it's not about bringing a viable solution. I would like to understand what is the current pain. And usually, as Michael was saying, is in the missing conversation between the technology and the business. I recently was in a space where, the technical side were trying to optimize the architecture, but it was not clear what was the business direction. So how can you optimize if you don't know your direction? What is the context? What is driving your choices? And they were clearly lacking this part, and the choices were coming out of dogmas. And the second thing for me is mostly about I try to extract down the context from the large scale discussion. It's messy, and then but then you start to see the bubbles with the purpose, and you can show during the discussion also that it's exactly because you didn't consider those bubbles that you have in this struggle, this friction on the boundaries. This problem is separate from this problem, and I want to make these people agree. I would like to make them both right in 2 different spaces. Yeah, but the main idea is try to understand exactly what is the pain that we are solving, and maybe DDD is not the solution. Maybe the solution is a better conversation about strategy, or a better strategy for recruiting, or many other things.
Thanks. So maybe DDD is not the solution to start with, right? To introduce it. So
I would challenge that.
Yeah. Sophia, before we go to the next question, I see Kim as well, but Sophia, what do you would like to add?
Okay, I just wanted to add something that is, I think, really useful to start with sometimes, with an eye-opener activity. Do a domain quiz, show everyone that they lacking domain knowledge, or they are not aware with all the different parts of the domain. And then you can start from there. So when people realize that they don't really know everything, and they don't really know their domain they are working on, or the particular team we are talking about, then you can actually teach them about the domain. I mean, you can actually start jump into practice immediately, as Alberto said as well, and also show them, so develop shared understanding and start to show them what their domain is about. But first, do an eye-opener activity like the domain quiz, and show them where they are with the domain knowledge.
Yeah, so you really need to start with the domain knowledge. Okay, Kim. Thanks, Sophia. Kim, you're up next, and then we'll move on to the next question and introduce 2 more people to the panel.
Okay. So for me, the best way to introduce DDD to the whole new team, my approach is to just get rid of the technical debate, because a lot of teams who are working in IT industry, they are rapidly impacted by rapidly changing technology. Sometimes they are encountered with pretty hot buzzword and try to deal with something with new technology. So especially if you or your customer are in cloud implementation, are running a few projects in cloud, you may realize there is a lot of new technology released in every year, especially in my company. A lot of people get stuck with how or when we should adopt new one to build a few new business on AWS. But I always tell them, don't think about that. If you want to have a concrete and strength business logic, and you try to adopt a few design pattern, and I don't introduce DDD at first, I just want to tell them you should have a clear layered architecture at first, and we just want to split off all the technology related ones. And if you do that, then you don't be afraid about yearly release the new technology. Then you have the chance to dig into how to make your business stable, how you could make your internal collaboration with your business goal, then with goals as well. So it is my approach to engage with the community in Taiwan and my friends. That's it.
Thanks. Yeah, nice perspective. So before we move on, and because I have a nice follow-up question here, I think this question is done, but I would like to introduce 2 more, or well, they will introduce themselves. Romeo, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Romeo. I don't know how much more to say. I'm not very interested as a person in Toto. I've been doing this for some years now, and some of my friends are here, so I decided to join. And I've been accused of being a coach or a dev and many other things in my life. And I have this disposition for modeling stuff all the time, which is a blessing, a curse, and also very annoying to people. That's basically it.
Thanks. And then off to Matthias before we continue to the next question.
You are muted. You are muted.
You are muted. Dominique is already adding it to Miro.
Was that on purpose, though?
No. Sorry, a bit tired, but well, I suppose as of today, I will just describe myself as one of the few people in the world who tend to do domain modeling on 2 banks at the same time. Yes, it's a crazy story, but for another time.
Thanks. And then off to the next question. Well, I got another question from Rebecca, who's asking, DDD is more than bounded context, aggregates, events. What is different, unique about DDD than in any other design practice or patterns? It seems that newcomers won't understand what DDD is, and it is more than just a mindset, but what is the essence this day? So Christina raised her hand first. So,
why is she asking this?
To challenge us, I think.
In Q&A.
In Q&A. In Q&A. No, I don't think you see. So Christina.
I do. Yeah.
You're on mute. It's number 4.
Oh. What I wanted to say, DDD is much more than this. At first, it's language in this domain. It's domain-driven decisions, domain-driven design sometimes later, but at first, it is based on domain. It's based on the ubiquitous language, on a common language, which drives us towards a much better direction as a technical one. technical decisions can work for a time or not, but domain-driven decisions are much thorough and based on the domain needs and not some needs from some developer or architect or product owner or somebody else. And this is, for me, the biggest difference.
Yeah, so it starts with the domain. Alexei, you were up next, I think, in my list.
Right. I think domain-driven design is about bounded context. That's one of the most powerful patterns that what Eric admits himself, because what we're trying to do is basically bring the context concept to the discussion, because in many cases we discuss the business without admitting that we should be focusing or at least trying to understand the context. Many systems work, like the domain itself is the business, right? So it's like we had a discussion, the problem versus solution space is what people do. It's where they earn money, the businesses earn money, that's their purpose. They try to solve people's problem. When we try to design a solution, we need to identify in which context of the domain we operate, because it's literally impossible to build a system that operates outside of the context, basic context free, and that tries to solve all the things at once. So, but still, yes, the name suggests, right? It's domain driven. So you focus on what people need, what they do, how they. I love to look back in time and see if the business is like what Matthias is often dealing with, like 150 years old business, like how they did it before, how they did it without computers, how they deal with consistency without computers, where people sit in the office physically, what steps in the process they performed. And usually a lot of questions that people raise about technicalities, they kind of disappear because it becomes obvious that things happened before. They were pretty efficient. We just tried to modernize it and we tried to make people's life easier. But that's all we do. We rarely invent something. It happens in very novel domains, something that never existed before, but the majority of businesses, like 80 and 90% of them, they existed before. They work without computers. So how do we make them more efficient? And how they operated in previous times. And of course, that nothing about aggregates. This is tactics, but the strategy, like where we are and what we do and what problems we solve and in which context. I think the linguistic concept of context is extremely important. And that's where context map and everything comes from. It has its name. You don't need to introduce the name first, but at least show things to people so they understand that this part is important.
So you're saying language is the big differentiator with bounded context, focus on the domain. So
one of the, yes. So like, again, we talk about this all the time. So let people speak same language as the business, but business even sometimes doesn't see the context because they are in the context. They rarely can explain that they are in the context. And only talking across context with different people working in different parts of the organization about the same thing, you realize where the context boundaries are. But people need to realize this.
So it's about language, right?
It is about language most of the time, yes.
So Marco, anything to add? Thanks, Alexei.
I would like to challenge the question by Rebecca. I mean, sure, there is this new concept that there is a ubiquitous language per bounded context and things, but I don't think that the DDD community or domain-driven design as a topic is something unique or special or very different. It's just a good culmination of topics. And whenever you start to try to convince people of why DDD is good, they can give you examples like, oh, this has been done before in topic X, Y, Z, and there's usually something to it. So I don't think that there is anything specifically new or different. It's just that the DDD community, with all the topics that are experimented within, are very mature and very focused on solving business problems. So it's a lot of strategizing. There's different strategy patterns, different modeling patterns, implementation patterns, architecture patterns, and nothing is set in stone. The whole DDD community doesn't work by the book and say, oh, but this is not in the blue book, so let's not make it DDD. The gatekeeping is very low. So of course, there are some people who would like to pull a boundary around and say, this is not DDD and this belongs in. But I think the essence or the value of the community is that we are all trying to solve business problems in a better way and are open to experimentations and new ideas all the time. And when someone invents a new method, we will experiment with it, integrate it, figure out what are the pros and cons, weigh the trade-offs, as long as it is some kind of problem solving or problem exploring or solution exploring tool, be it in the socio-technical part, in the strategical part, in the tactical part, it doesn't really matter. All those things, thank you, washing machine. That's my washing machine singing for us now. Merry Christmas. So all these tools come together, all these people come together to learn and to improve the craft. And that is what makes the DDD community something very special. But DDD as a topic, I think, is just it's just a term that is used now. In 10, maybe 20 years, people will look back and say, oh, remember DDD back then? And they will have a new topic. Like 20 years ago, there was no DDD, but then people did almost the same things when they did object-oriented architecture and design and other modeling methods. Like, there is nothing special to the method itself. It's the community and the mindset behind it that is valuable right now. But I would never stick to the name. If in 10 years there's another name to do the same great things, let's switch the name. The name is not important. Right now, it's a good name to Google by, and it's a good topic. If a conference is DDD-centric, maybe you learn a great deal of things because the individuals in that community, those are the really important parts. And end of monologue. Thank you.
Thanks. So yeah, it's now a sort of what would we call it last time? An centered unbounded or something? I don't remember.
Centered set.
Yeah, thanks, Matthias. So before we go to you, Matthias, Trond was just before you. He sniped in another way. Not a nerd snipe, maybe it is. But Trond.
Thank you. Actually, it's a nice segue because I think Matthias can follow up on what I'm going to say. I sort of want to pick up where Alexia left off, because I agree with all of you who already said, spoken, Marco as well, that DDD is more of a collection of things that we kind of know in the industry already. But there is something unique to domain-driven design, I would say. And for me, the uniqueness is, as Alexia said, is the language. I'm going to take us back a few years. It's going to make me sound older than I really am, but back in the 70s, with Parnas and all that, we had a focus on procedures and grouping software. We knew that we had to group software better. We couldn't deal with this massive amount of information at one time. So we had to group it. And so procedures was sort of this one thing that we did. And then later on, we moved into objects. And then, for example, later in the 2000s, we moved into service orientation. So boundaries is something we have done a long time. So even bounded context may be not as unique, or at least boundaries in itself is not as unique to domain-driven design. For me, what is unique is that when you model, your model should be reflected by the domain language. That's what's make unique. So you find your boundaries by your domain language. That is, for me, completely unique. We had a long discussion with Nick the other day about business capabilities, for example. And they are surprisingly simple, because you just invent what the capabilities are, not invent, but you imagine as a business what sort of capabilities you want to have. So you decide up front. So it's very top-down, bottom-up. Top-down, outside-in. While domain-driven design is saying, okay, instead, let's look at the language and find out where this boundaries are instead of designing it bottom-up. Top-down. Sorry, confused. So I remember I discussed this with, not this specific topic, but something similar with Matthias at UConn, I think, where we discussed what was unique about domain-driven design. I think he had good input there, at least as far as I can remember. So, segue to you, Matthias.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Next up. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree with everything that was said. There's of course DDD, the book DDD as intended, which probably cannot be captured in the book. DDD as practiced over the years, which has evolved. DDD, the community. These are all, we should consider the context where we're discussing this. But DDD, the book, is I'd say a pattern language of mostly things that people have been doing, right? Just discovering that it is a pattern and naming it and describing it. But I do think that the idea of, and boundaries are not new, and we had components and modules and all these things. I do think that bounded contexts are a novel idea. I haven't found it described in that way elsewhere under a different name. Even in Data and Reality by Bill Kent, he gets like this close, but he doesn't get there, which it was like a thriller reading it for me. So the idea of the model as a first-class thing, right? It's not just a system has a model, but the model itself and the language are one, and we lift them up and they're first class. And because we do that, we can now reason about the relationships between these contexts and you know, the patterns, conformists, etc. How does one model relate to another at sort of a meta level? I think that is a very unique insight. I think it's so unique that Eric didn't fully realize, based on what he described to me, how important it was until later on, and people started to react to that idea. So now we associate DDD with bounded context, but that wasn't like the main thing we talked about or that people talked about in the first years. And I've learned recently a model that I'm still sort of playing around with it, but I think we can apply to DDD and the problem of now I lost the question. But you know, how do newcomers, why don't they understand it? Part of it is that it's describing software design from the smallest building blocks to the largest sort of clusters of bounded contexts and things like that. So what's happening there is in any organization or system, there's tactics that usually comes first, and as it grows, you need to start thinking about strategy, right? So how not just what do we do, but how do we look forward into what will be the right way of doing things? What was an informed decision of how to win? That's a strategy. But there's a third layer which DDD also addresses, and that's optionality. That is, what kind of options do we need to create for ourselves that will allow us to choose strategies in the future? So that's like a meta level on top of strategy, in the same way that strategy is a meta level on top of tactics. So it allows you to you basically build it, and it's not just DDD; it's everywhere, of course. But you by thinking about options, you create at a cost the opportunities later to pick a certain strategy without knowing what those strategies will be. In the same way that with a strategy, you don't know necessarily what tactics you will use. And now the confusing thing in this model is that when you're used to dealing with tactics, when you're coding, for example, you're at a very detailed tactical level. Everything is a 2-week sprint. Everything is a, you know, how am I going to solve this problem in the next hour even, or in the next 2 minutes with TDD? That's a very sort of local, direct decision making. The language is about that directness, right? It's you get into a flow. When you're talking about strategy, you're talking, you know, longer term, and the language of tactics seems less relevant. You know, we know we will do this sort of thing, but we're trying to decide where this, you know, what this architecture will do in the long term. It's even worse for people at tactics who are not used to think about strategies, because then strategy sounds like bullshit. But in the other direction, you have the same problem. So people, architects, for example, dealing with strategy, might feel that management speak, or at least, you know, upper level executives whose job it is to deal with optionality, speak in bullshit language, because they're talking about strategies, and management is maybe talking about sort of what capabilities, major capabilities, do we need to start planning for now to be able to have these options in the distant future. And the architects are sort of in the middle, looking both ways and being the bridge between everything. So Romeo says that bullshit language is useful. I absolutely agree. In this model, marketing language, which sounds maybe like bullshit language to people doing programming, where everything has a direct impact, where marketing language has a very sort of indirect, longer term impact, right? And talks about very abstract ideas like what will customers feel about this, or how, you know. So everybody else's language always looks weird. DDD is very complex because it's, again, trying to cover this entire space. So everybody who looks at it from one angle feels like the other angles are bullshit. if you're dealing with strategy and somebody talks about DDD being aggregates and entities, that sounds like bullshit because you're not at that level in that context. So I think that, to me, that model seemed like a possible explanation for the difficulty and the confusion that arises with DDD. The other part of it is simply that Eric's book, you know, sometimes a single sentence. I actually did a keynote on a single sentence in Eric's book, a whole hour presentation. So it is very dense. There's a lot of stuff in there that isn't explained in much detail. It would be a 10,000 page book, of course, otherwise. But that's sort of my thinking model now.
Yeah, and it's already 800-900, right? So
I don't think it's that much, but
I don't remember. It seems like that. Yeah. So thanks. So it's about, well, I think the key point is language here.
Tactics, strategy, optionality.
Yeah. Something I think. Pages. So that's less than I thought of. Thanks for looking up. Alberto was next. So any other idea to add or?
Well, disagree. Short now. Next time, could you please avoid putting me after Matthias? Thanks. Okay. No, I will be short. And for me, it's a combination of 5 things: curiosity, craft, ability, skills. Well, the same thing, synonym. Perfectionism, and the obsession with the language and the purpose. Just like we need to understand what is the problem that we are solving, we need to make sure that our building blocks are perfectly suited for the job. That's it.
Thanks. Yeah, and next up was Sophia. Did you have anything to add on that question?
Yeah, I will be very short as well. I just wanted to mention that what I really love in this is the wide spectrum. So reflecting to the others, what they said. So really, no matter if you are a product person or you are a developer, an architect, or whoever you are, you can still enjoy the entire, you know, all the techniques, the patterns, the community. So I really just wanted to add this, that what I experienced. So you can always find your favorite part of it.
Yeah, in the community itself. Yeah,
as well.
Thanks.
Patterns.
Yeah. Michael.
Yeah, I would like to add one more thing. I think it was mentioned already quite a few times in an indirect fashion, but I think domain-driven design is also a lot about communication. I mean, where does this language derive from? Language derives from communication, from getting a shared understanding between domain experts, developers, architects, product owners, and so on and so forth. And I think years and years ago, when I first read the Blue Book by Eric, I think that's the thing that struck my nerve, was like this very strong emphasis on direct collaboration between developers and domain experts, not writing stuff into a specification and then keeping the fingers crossed that everything will go well, but getting a shared understanding about why do we build a certain product. What's the domain behind the software and so on. And I think this is also something where a lot of stuff happened in the community. Take a look at ideas like event storming, domain storytelling, and so on and so forth. And I think those ideas are, at least in my perception, mainly about communication. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, where language is really important, right? Dawn.
I think I'm very short again, Matthias. I think I love what you said. Also, Alberto, for me, DD was familiar. It wasn't necessarily the same names that I'd use for something, but I recognized and saw, okay, we're now trying to struggle and frame. The thing I love about bounded context, when I think about it, as a word in English, to bind is to put together. and everything is in a context, but you actually come together and share the same almost perspective, define what that is in your own different languages, and then you carry on this journey together. Yes, everybody still has their own perspective. They still have their own internal mental model, but then there is something that you share. The things that Alberto talked about, understanding the problem, I tell you, I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. How many times have I said this as a designer? It's like, what is the actual, that is the cliche of a designer. If you give them a problem, the first thing they will ask you is, oh, is that the actual problem, or should we go and check out and explore and see if we've actually nailed that? And then you start looking for a solution. I also agree that when you get down to the tactics and the detail and almost the atomic level, most people, you know, sort of their eyes glaze over. But the thing with DDD is that you can take people along, so it's inclusive and it's all the way. And I think there's a lot of overlap with other methods. And it's important to name things so that people understand what they are. But I think the thing for me was the inclusion and the shared almost mind meld for, oh, I recognize that. I call it something different. But yes, I agree. Sort out the problem first, agree that that's the problem. And then let's try very quickly different solutions, find the one that is appropriate, and then go build that.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah. So it's all about, so you recognize the patterns, and but it's great that it has a language across these many different layers, tactics, strategy, and even higher potential. Thanks. So Vladik, you're up next, and then I'll introduce the next question if Marco has, I see just Marco raising his hands, and then we'll go to the next question after Marco. So thanks.
Two more cents from me. So I want to expand a bit on Michael, am I pronouncing right? Michael, and Don's points about communication. And that's actually a funny story, because that's how I got into domain-driven design. It started when I was in the university, and I did a research about why software projects fail. Now, if you look at studies that were done to investigate the reasons, half of them say explicitly communication issues, and a quarter says it implicitly, like a failure to communicate requirements or product status. So back then, I found that domain-driven design book, and it struck a nerve for me, like, hey, here is something which aims to fix these communication issues, which are causing software projects to fail. So for me, that was a big advantage of using domain-driven design for future projects. And about the original question about the essence of domain-driven design, I would say that for me, the essence is aligning software design with the needs of the business. And ubiquitous language, bounded context, aggregates, value object, etc. These are just tools. These are the tools that domain-driven design provides for achieving that goal of aligning problem and solution domains. That's what I wanted to add.
Perfect, thanks. It's nice how you, that's also how I got to know DDD. It's about miscommunication in requirements. So that's interesting. Marco, anything new to add?
No, nothing new to add, just a question to Dawn. So I really liked what you said, and I wanted to understand, would you drill it down to two concepts? Like, well, that's what I got from your message, like unconstrained feedback in ever shorter loops. So to drag everyone along on all hierarchy levels, and so the unconstrained feedback on the one hand and the explicit experimentation on the other.
I call it looking for the needle in the haystack. The problem half the time is people find a thing, they don't validate that that is actually even a needle. What is the definition of a needle? It's metal with a loop, whatever. Do you agree? And then the first thing that is hard, solid, that they find, let's build that. It's part of the haystack. It's not the needle that you were looking for. And so if you look at, I live out in the middle of the countryside in Denmark, and I just see fields everywhere. If you look at a haystack, it's pretty dense, it's pretty solid. You do not want to be hit by one of those things. But a straw by itself, very light. And a lot of this is mechanized. I mean, they take one massive tractor to harvest an entire field. And this thing works out, okay, this is what I want, and then the rest is I don't want. And being able to do that really, really, really quickly, as a designer, that is half my job. Basically, by finding the right problem, working out what the vision is, and then being able to say, when somebody pulls something up, does it look like this? No. Does it look like this? No, no. Apparently, that is 10 times faster than going from the atomic level and trying to build it up and work out if you have a mistake or not. So you have to have that pincer movement and that two-pronged attack. And I think what's happening naturally and organically is the top down and the bottom up have finally come together and working in sequence rather than saying it's one or the other. It has to be both. So needle, haystack. Is it haystack? Drop it. Spend your time, focus, find the needle. Once you have your problem, that's the needle. Now, what's the solution to that? And that's what I would boil it down to. And when I look at design tools, and I look at DDD, it's amazing. They're almost the same, but just slightly different perspectives to that problem, to that challenge.
Yeah, thank you. So, final afterthought from me: what if there's multiple needles in the haystack and they are all valuable but different? How would you go about that?
Right. So again, then you start to come in to use some of the developer tools. You have your superclass, and then you have your specifics. And you need then at that point, once you have your group of needles, okay, which one is the one that we actually want to, that will be of most value? You change the conversation. Now, what's the one that's the most valuable to whom? The business, not the developers. It could be something that's very easy for developers to make. It will be of no value to the business. Again, you have your comparator. Okay, is it valuable? Is it this one? Is it this one? Okay, seems to be the right fit. Now let's go build that. So it's a process of elimination. And that's the thing that struck me about DDD. You're figuring out from a tactical level how to quickly get feedback to eliminate the possibilities that are not relevant. So that's what I would say.
Thanks. Nice. So Alexei, you saw Romeo raising his hand. Do you want to go first, or do you want Romeo to react on this? Because he
no, Romeo raised his hand, so I see that you haven't reacted to my message. Romeo first, then I'll just compliment a couple of words.
Go on, Romeo. If he can.
We probably need a better system, right? So I love the haystack metaphor. So anyway, talking about prior art and the domain-driven design, I actually would love someday to ask this question about Eric Evans, but there is this guy in France called Jacques Sassoon. I don't know how known outside of France he is, because every book I read of him is in French. But he created a school of design called urbanisme that stole many ideas of urbanization towards software development, right? And in those ideas, in the end of the 90s, he was talking a lot about, he called it by different names, but by concepts that really look really, really close to bounded context and things like that. And I don't know if Eric Evans knew about urbanism or if it's just something that appeared on the side or something like that, but I always had that curiosity. And I do think urbanism is interesting to look at. I do prefer domain-driven design to it, but it's interesting to look at prior art that actually had many of the same ideas to it, and to compare them. And that question, that wasn't the previous question, so I don't even know what is the current question. So sorry, Susan.
Doesn't matter. Thanks. Alexei, do you want to add anything before we move to the next question?
Yeah, just we had a discussion in the chat about Christina saying that like examples of failing in the right place, and I think, and she mentioned that Matthias was telling something about it, and as an architect, I feel this pain, like Matthias said, being in between. What I found really hard is that sometimes it's extremely, almost impossible to extract the strategic goal from even the higher management because sometimes they cannot formulate it. So you need to work it out. You actually need to guide them, and you cannot guide them in a way like I tell you how to do it. They will not accept it because they are on a higher level of hierarchy. They kind of just, they talk a different language. But you can subconsciously guide them by participating in some of the things that I likely have possibility, because I'm part of the technical section leadership group, to actually show them the way. Very subtle, because any strong movement would immediately trigger the opposite reaction. In a subtle way, try to understand where the company is going. And sometimes it involves jumping over to one or two heads and going directly to CEO and say what you really want to do in 3 to 5 years. Because the development part of the organization is sometimes to focus, like Matthias said, on sprints, or maybe going beyond, like a roadmap for this half a year, maybe a roadmap for the year. That's full of features. And then you don't see the horizon because it's crowded by all these things here and there and over there, and you don't see the connection where the company is actually going. I love this example. Like, remember, Matthias, you did the workshop about strategic design, and you gave this example of the company hiring cars, and like, what's the most important problem to solve? It's like the car availability, so it's yield management. And then you drop the big thing on the floor saying, but the company strategy is to deal with self-driving vehicles. The yield issue, it disappears. It's like, if you don't know that, you just jump right ahead and started solving the yield issue. That's extremely complex. But without knowing that the company
haystack.
Doesn't really care about this. Yeah, that's the haystack. Exactly. So, and then say, just hire 50 people for 1 year and they will deal with this manually. And then after a year, or how much time the company predicts to be in a self-managed yield mode. And then the cars start drive themselves around the drop-off places. And the problem disappears. So the investments sometimes overcome the return. And with this, I also struggle a lot with, I'm sorry to say, if I hope that doesn't hurt anyone, with product people that also struggle with them being pushed by higher management to deliver certain features. Because I had a recent conversation saying, look, we have this brilliant model that replaces our current kind of broken model, and it will allow us to do this and this and this. And I've heard a couple of those things already mentioned by you and higher management. And what they say, but we don't have this in the roadmap for next half year, so we don't do it. Say, man, if you don't do it, we won't be able to achieve this. It's what about optionality? We won't be able to do what you want still in the third and fourth quarter, maybe next year, right? So, but they don't see that. I mean, I started the big clinch with product because they once dropped this phrase, I don't care how it's done. And I said, we are in the tech section, you should care, because that's part of your job. As much as part of my job to understand the problem, understand the product, understand the customer pain. So if I challenge you as a product manager, you can challenge me why we need to do that, but we need to talk to each other and the same language and understand this, the common goal. So like not speaking with us and them and stuff like that. So like there is a wall between us, like speaking, so stop dropping requirements over the wall and stop dropping features, stop expecting features to be dropped on the other side and you can try them out. So this is a bit of struggle, and I feel it every day, even after we've made a big kind of move and a lot of improvements, but still it's there. The mentality is still there. So it's really hard to overcome. Another thing about
I must
the model itself.
Quickly interject that in 2014, the strategy was that there would be driverless cars all over the roads in 2020.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the things is about boundaries. Yes, I agree that we used to have boundaries, but we mostly focus on the boundaries of a particular domain, right? But the domain it might be too complex. I have examples in a domain that I'm currently working hands-on, that there are lurking like 3 or 4 bounded contexts at the same time. And trying to build a system to focus on the domain itself, it doesn't work because it's just too much. And if you try to model it in a different way, not like it's done now, where everything is like intertwined and interconnected, is a huge thing if you have a relation database and stuff. If you try to look deeper, it's like the data, like even on the physical level, the data starts to disappear. Because in my context, I don't care about 90% of what you have. In this context, I don't care about 80% of what you have. So all these gigantic tables, they start to disappear. They start to shrink in size. There's a lot of cost benefit for companies as well. Because if you keep everything forever, everything that's probably you don't need, you don't think about that, you kind of just put it in one place and nobody knows what's going on. And it's extremely hard. And people tended to accept it for granted and they don't know their way out. And then trying to kind of, the power of model in the context is insane. Like you just need to, or at least that's how I can see my job. It's like you just need to distill it. That's what I do like on a daily basis, and bring developers to understanding that this distilled model is actually aiming for that particular needle, right? So that's the, or the high stack in this regard. I mean, depending on the context, what you need, right? So that's my
thanks.
5 cents.
Yeah. And while you were saying this, I had Alberto in my back, and now he raised his hand. So let's go to Alberto, and then I'll introduce the next question on it. But these are great discussions. So Alberto.
That's really quick, much more of a question than anything to say. Like it's, I mean, it looked like this discussion or it might be polarized between the technical side and the business side, talking about strategy and so on. But maybe it's not like that. Maybe it's not the bipolar thing. Maybe there's more people that should join the party. Like one of the most annoying surprises for organization is just like their architecture is impacting their possibility to recruit people with good skills because nobody wants to start maintaining an old monolith and you're gonna have some troubles recruiting the right people now. And or maybe you just don't pay them enough. But it's not only between business and technology, it's the whole ecosystem in many places, and that you have to start pulling around. I don't know if you have the same feeling. That was, or how do you deal in this scenario? That was my type of question.
Yeah, so let's dive first.
I just wanted to
reply.
Yeah, what it just reminded me of the conversation I had last week, and it struck me hard. Because we kept talking about, I mean, I hate the word resource when it applies to developers, to any people. It's like being exploited. I mean, we have a consensus in the community, that's just a bad word, but the management just speaks this language continuously. It's like, I have 5 resources over there and 3 resources there. I say, look, what I'm concerned as an architect, and I see this intertwined model that's very hard to fit in the head, basically impossible to fit in my head. I don't understand what's going on when I look at this huge database like a system. Like Alberto said, like, I know that a lot of people are unhappy. You cannot have unhappy or happy resource. Resource is something you exploit until it just disappears. It's gone. But you have happy or unhappy people. And you have people who want to work for you because you have awesome, like, contextualized work that people can get autonomy and work with in relative isolation with good conversations, but deliver results and shorten the feedback loop. Just piggyback what you talked about in Kandinsky a couple of years ago, Alberto. So, but like until management stops seeing people as resource, and until management stop thinking about, like in all the conversations we had about improving the architecture, improving context boundaries, giving people autonomy to deliver, I never heard anything about how developers actually feel about doing their job. And then I said, you know what? Our goal is not only to deliver features. Our goal is not only make our customers happy, but I want to see happy developers. Happy developers are like twice as productive. Happy developers do not leave you. Happy developers will join you, right? So that's just a couple of words in addition to what Alberto is saying.
Going into that question, and would like to see the raise hand after this. But going on that, and there's a question how to introduce DDD to your organization. Maybe maybe we should ask a different question. And I asked this question before. So let's see if who wants to react on this. Does DDD only work if you're not in a feature factory IT organization? And with feature factory, I mean how John Cutler described it, right? You just ditch out Jira stories to a team and they'll just pump it out like resources, as you say. So I think Marco was first on this question.
At some point, I have to react later because it's a strategical bad side to be the first person talking. On the other hand, icebreaking, yay. So yes, it does work, of course, but you get more benefit if you are not working in a feature factory with domain-driven design. That's kind of trivial. Anyway, even if you are in a factory there where you just get like, okay, you need to perform, you need to do this feature in a week, and then a completely different feature comes in, you're doing short-term projects or whatever, still, trying to understand what you actually have to build and finding ways to get to that knowledge is beneficial even in short-term work. If people just give you like a written description of what you have to do and you have no chance of interacting, even in that case, using semantics in code, even just using the tactical patterns, help you to get clarity. Having in written language business lingo in your code, it doesn't take more time. It just needs different mindset to write business language, and then the next time you try to figure out what you actually written here, or the next person tries to collaborate with you, it reads more clearly the intent. And usually that is the start of a cultural change, or at least there's a probability of cultural change. So even if you are in such a bad place, starting to write better code and having more and more questions come up all the time is a spark. You can change culture from there and saying, look, we're trying to understand here. If this happens and then that happens, what should happen next? And then you can have an actual meaningful conversation. So yes, the short answer is yes. It's meaningful, even in the worst case scenario. Using the business language is already a win. And usually it helps you change culture from there. And if not, run. I mean, at some point, just run and leave.
Go to that company Alexei was talking about then, right? Thanks. Christina.
It is exactly what I wanted. My answer would have been started with what Marco said, just run. This is the short answer, just run. I know how it is. And yes, if you are a stubborn person and with a lot of energy and patience, and you believe in that company, then you can start implementing, you can start using it. You can start sharing the word, sharing the knowledge, sharing the links, insights, ideas. You can start for this, but depends everything on the culture and on the strategy and goal of the company. If the company is an agency, happy to sell features, I would say you can try, but you will break, because this is the strategy. The strategy is not to have some bounded contexts, but to sell line of code and time and resources. If this is not the case, then sure, this is then a momentary. Let's say it so. They didn't know it better, so you can explain and teach and coach and lead and move them further in the direction of the. Sure, every company was most companies were a feature factory sometimes, so we had this way to work. But the question is where they want to go and where they want to be and where you want to be. So either run, or you are happy with it, or try to change it. Yeah, sure.
Thanks. So I hear a couple of times now, and I think it's a pattern that I heard Alexei saying it, I heard Marco and you saying it, and probably more, is that you need to scale to gently nudge higher management strategists there. So I feel that it's a pattern that's, if you want to move better, a across your boundary, then that's a skill we should learn ourselves. Maybe Dawn with her haystack metaphor, which was awesome, has something to add there.
Alexi, I love what you said about where are the people. Once you have the technology and everything else, you remove it, you cannot do that without people. And if people are not inspired, they're not happy, eventually, yes, they will leave, vote with their feet and leave. That's the same problem we have even with customers. So if you trace it all the way up, you have happy employees, you have employees working well with management. Guess what? They don't make crap, even if it is features, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is, before we made features, I don't remember who said this. I think Romeo, you said this. What happened before? What did we do before? We used to guess. So I think there's a level of maturity and understanding, and I think it comes back again down to language and their context. And what you said, Kenny, about talking to all the way up to this chain and back down to the developers. Without developers, you can't make anything. But without management, then you can't get the investment in order to be able to make the thing. So everything is complicated by people. And focusing on that and not just the technology. Again, one of the terms I really love from this community is the socio-technical system. It's all of that and looking at it holistically, and that is part of your context. If you ignore that stuff, then it will be a pain in the behind and come and bite you at the time when you least want it or expect. But I think the tactic I use a lot of the time is, okay, the thing that you're making, who is your market? Who's going to buy it? How much money is it going to make you? Okay, that's not working. So let's try something else. You can either keep doing the same thing that you've been doing, and you know where that's going to go. It's eventually going to be an ever decreasing circle. Or you can take a risk and try something. Nothing to lose. And you have to have those conversations and keep progressing. Yes, Christina, I agree. It's a pain in the behind. You feel like you're the lone prophet in the desert talking. But I think that by addressing the people aspect as well as the technology, it's the intersection, the binding of those two that gives you the best solution. That's my 5 cents.
Yeah, thanks. And I heard Kent Beck always going on to that saying, compared to what? And that reminds me of what you were saying. So this is what you've been doing all the time. Let's try something else. Yeah, thanks. So before I introduce a next question, we have Alexi and Christina, and then we'll go to the next question and dive a bit more into DDD theory again for the next question. So Alexi, anything to add?
You are muted.
Ooh, counter up.
Jesus. Okay. Third one. I mean, honestly, I don't see anything wrong with about features. I mean, customers have no interest in bound context or whatever we deal with. They are not really interested in what software we write, and even about quality inside it. They're interested in quality outside it, right? As soon as it works and delivers value and it's fast and people are satisfied. So I always look at my like some apps that I consider useful in my phone. If they did an update, I checked what they changed. I'm looking for new features, and I'm very disappointed when they say we improved something on the backend or something and we fixed some bugs. I mean, that's disappointing. We want new features. What I try to do with product people, I try to say, okay, don't show me what you want to do now. Don't show me what you want to do in the next few months. Show me what you want to do in this year and maybe the year ahead. And the thing is that a lot of times just getting the power, and it's hard to get this power, but getting the power to amend the order of execution of the feature train brings you possibilities to squeeze in heavy modeling exercises. But then you need to align with product and say, look, if you do this, we can do the feature that you planned now and the feature that you plan in 3 months and feature that you plan in 1 year time, all at the same time with the same time frame that you just planned for a single feature, because it opens the opportunities for us. It makes things easier. And then they take it as like for granted as part of the feature delivery, some heavy lifting or maybe not that heavy lifting that you have to do now. But unless you do that, unless you actually bind something that you need to do in terms of modeling, in terms of discovery to actual deliveries, you probably will never succeed in this sense, because it's very hard to buy time spent solely on improving your model. So I'm going to distill a model for 2 months. Nobody gives you money for that. That's just a fact of life. As talking about capitalism and all this, it's just not paying off. Unless the company is gonna die because you don't deliver software at scale. That's another concern, but that's also money. It just says, you can say just, I know that we have a number of incidents during the last couple of months. And if we not do something about it by improving the model and improving the software underneath, and nobody's going to see any features, the company is getting out of business by the end of this year, all because all the customers are going to leave. That actually works. So, I mean, features are fine, but because customers want features, that's okay. They pay us money. But again, aligning these feature deliveries together with what you want to do inside the system, that's a good strategy that actually works, but it's not easy. So that's just my experience.
Cool, thanks. Christina, anything to add before we go to the next question?
Yeah, I was going to contradict myself, or only Matthias is allowed to. I'm doing this for a year now. I started this company at the company where I am now. They were a silo-based feature factory, but the CTO was sold to DD. I don't know how, I don't know why, but he was convinced that this is the way to go. And we are agency, we are working for clients and selling software, and it is very hard work to do to convince the product owners. They don't ask me how many points I think it is this feature, but how important is it for you? It should be done or should be not done. That's it. And the whole design stuff, they are all in because they don't really know about what I am talking about, but they see the results. And this is okay. They are sold for the idea, but still, it is very hard. You need a lot of energy. Not sure. Yeah. I couldn't work. I would have left if it would be somewhere else.
And I think it's nice sometimes to contradict yourself, because then we'll probably learn something. So let's dive. So I think this was mostly about the social part as well, right? The communication, but let's dive a bit more into the ubiquitous language where we were talking about in communication. So here's a question. How can the domain with corrupted ubiquitous language, and this is what we usually see in brownfield, right, be fixed in the short term? I believe we should focus on strategic design first. Otherwise, I think the domain will become anemic. So how on short term can you fix a corrupted ubiquitous language? So raise your hands if you want to speak up there and start. Yeah, Matthias, go ahead.
Yeah, I just clicked it because nobody else was clicking it. But so yeah, so how can you fix it if it's corrupted? Of course, the question then is what is corrupted and how does that work and etc. But yeah, I think start focusing on the alternative, right? Modeling at low level, visualizing language and process, and very often that, right, changing the angle that you look at it, right? Perspective, a change in perspective is worth 80 IQ points. If people are very much stuck in what happens usually is you don't have domain experts anymore, you have system experts, right? So you have people who are so used to working with the system. Maybe they joined the company after the system was built and they don't understand the domain. They understand how to use the system, what buttons to click, etc. And that's how they communicate. And that system language is based on a previous lack of modeling and worry about language. So everything is, create thing and update thing, etc. So the change in perspective can come from trying to not just not model the system, but also try modeling in an entirely different way than people have been doing. And usually that would be sort of structural modeling. What are the things, the data, the structures, the entities, the relationships, etc. Instead, turn it around and start modeling events, processes, constraints, business rules, interactions, behavior, right? Or start modeling examples from a different angle instead of an example of using the system. Make it an example of a person with a problem, right? In their language. How would the user describe their problem before they even find us? So that's probably where I would start intuitively. But yeah, how did it go wrong? Of course, that's always an interesting question. Do we even have access to people who still know what it was supposed to do? Because there's of course this pattern where the people who knew it and who translated it into system language or technical language have long left and are not around anymore. So there was nobody to actually learn it from. And they probably had a bus factor problem, and they had or what Alberto calls the dungeon master, right? I think that's more or less the.
So they need to find the Rosetta Stone. That's what you're. They've lost the Rosetta Stone.
Yeah, you lost it, but you cannot reproduce it. It's lost information, right? It's not it's not that it's hidden somewhere most of the time. You need entirely different angles for approaching it so that people break out of in the before times I in these situations I recommended customers to actually go to a different location, rent some space somewhere, maybe even travel somewhere so that you're more out of your usual environment, which helps for other reasons as well, but mostly for distractions and stuff like that, but sort of push the whole thinking in different ways by changing everything. This even goes back to Gerald Weinberg, who wrote that consulting is you go in, you see what they are doing. If it doesn't work, try something else. Right? So that would be where I start, I guess.
Thanks, Marco. So more people now raised their hand. Thanks, Matthias. So let's see what they have to say. Marco, let's start.
Yeah, I would totally agree with Matthias' way of taking the user perspective and then asking what the actual people who use a system or work with the rules actually want from the system to derive some language from there. On the more practical part of how to actually change your system, of course, I would agree with the person who asked the question. You should start with strategics first. So, but if that is not possible, if your ubiquitous language is broken and you cannot really go into deeper modeling, there's a trick I usually use, and that is forbidding primitive data types. Just start with values for everything and go with whatever fits your understanding at the moment. If you have the dungeon master at hand, you can have a discussion and derive some language from there. If you have access to customers, that is valuable as heck. But if you cannot find anyone to talk to, take your best guess and rename your types so that you don't have an internet daytime, but no, I'm not. I only have a German domain in my head, but finding the terms that make sense to you and then put them into code. And then your conversation changes. And from that changed conversation, you derive more and more meaning with every iteration. So refactoring to deeper insight as a first-class citizen to refactoring a broken ubiquitous language on a tactical level is a pretty good thing to get the flow going. Totally depending, of course, on the maturity of the team. If the team is already on board with tactical patterns, it's just missing access to business people, then of course go that way, find access, get your customers in the house or in the virtual house now. But yeah, end of my 2 cents.
Yeah, so that's, I think Julie said in the past as well, you can start from the inside out if you make something consistent within your team, or go from there, right, and see how you can change.
And the understanding that your model is never perfect, right? So of course your ints and strings aren't perfect at all, and your variable names with one letter, they are broken as heck. But you don't have to be perfect to start. It's just just the next best thing that you can come up with, just put it in there. Now your understanding is more reflected in the code. And your understanding will grow because clarity grows now. And whenever you figure out that your new model doesn't work, change your new model a little bit. So it is not a big step that you have to take at any point in time. It's just a series of small steps that make a lot of sense in the moment. And then the model gets better and better and better. And again, that is just a spark to get the ball rolling to start a culture change, which is what I'm trying to propose anytime. Stop the fuck with all the wrong things you're doing and start conversing with people, have a discussion about language and culture and strategy in the first place. But whatever helps to get the ball rolling. So forbidding primitive data types is my usual heuristic there, starting with values from the get-go.
Good. That's a nice heuristic to start. Michael, anything to add, or do you think it's different?
Absolutely. I basically can would have started with the same thing that Marco said. Focus on value objects first, or on primitive data types, or forbidding primitive data types is as Marco said it. And that's a first step that I often take. And the next step is when I elaborate or dig into a domain with a team, we will obviously see many assumptions around. And most of those assumptions are implicit. Yeah, they are in the heads of the developers or in the heads of the people. Now, depending on the availability of domain experts or even access to domain experts, what I always suggest the teams is make your assumptions that go into your model, that led to your model, make them explicit, document them, write them up, make them visible. Yeah, because in the moment when you make stuff visible, you attract other people who may want to reason about those assumptions. And then you get into conversations which will probably help you in refining your ubiquitous language. My 2 cents.
Thanks. Great. So nice adding to that heuristic. Alberto, anything to add? Or do you see it completely different?
Maybe something about psychology. Like, okay, if you are new, you join a new company, you see an old code base, what you see is basically a big cathedral of crap. And you are trying to find better words to express it because you cannot say this. But the urgency is to change the whole everything. When you say like corrupted ubiquitous language is, I hate the whole of this. Just like there's not a single thing which is right in this and this thing. And of course you cannot change this. So 2 things here. One, you might want to look for the for what is the perceived pain, because if you ask people to change the language, that's a very hard thing to do. If you think about if you're solving a problem that they do not feel, you're asking people to change the way they express things in habits. When changing habits is tough, it needs energy, requires a plan, and a lot of stuff. So if you're not solving a problem, you're just fighting windmills. And the other thing is they might not even realize they have a problem. Just like everybody knows that the code CO7 means this. Okay. And this was everybody in the company. Well, CO7, yeah, CO7, yo, bro. That was the problem. Maybe in some places, those people never had the chance to see a different model. So if you only want to see the problem, you have to show that the different thing is possible. So maybe just 2 days of exploration, coding something that means exactly what you understood and looks like, oh, that looks really, really different from what we had here. Oh, wow, I didn't have this and this complexity. Yeah, I don't want it. I just put it in that box, and this is readable and still works. So sometimes this does the job. But it just this thing, like psychologically, most of the people actually see something and hate it, but it's also very easy to say, like, I don't like this. And what would you do instead? You realize you might have 4 or 5 diverging ideas, and then, oh, how do you solve this? So that's, I would like to give the opportunity, try to make something different, see what we have. Okay, then we can decide on something.
Good. Thanks. Alexei.
I just want to clarify a bit of terminology because Dungeon Master is something that we mentioned a few times. I don't remember, Alberto, if you make it explicit. I separate Dungeon Masters from Dungeon Keepers. Okay. So Dungeon Keeper doesn't see the problem, and they never allow you to change anything because they think it just works great because they have built it 15 years ago and it's awesome. Dungeon Masters, however, and deal with them on a daily basis, they're well aware of the problem. They may be even pointing you to where the problem exists. And having conversation with Dungeon Master, because actually sometimes it's a burden for them to be a single point of knowledge about the existing system, how it works. And they'd like to be relieved of this. And they want to do something else, maybe. And they maybe want to build a better system, but they just don't know how. They have no capacity. So I would like, if you see it as people, try to understand their nature. It's like if it's like an evil nature or self-preservation, or they actually want to evolve. Luckily, I had experience with both. So I deal with Dungeon Keepers and I dealt with Dungeon Masters. And the second, of course, is much more pleasurable experience. And second, I have a tip because we talk about because language, right? So in my observation, and I've heard it before on the workshops, like, so let's make a glossary for ubiquitous language. And that's, I think it's just plain wrong because the glossary tells you definition of terms. And terms are very often, or most of the times, are nouns. They're missing the verbs. That's why the original question was, doesn't make the domain model, not the domain cannot be anemic, the domain model anemic. Yes, if you just have nouns, it will become anemic one way or another because only verbs express behavior. As soon as you start bringing behavior to the model, you will see how it starts to change. Things start to flow apart. So like these things happen only here, and these things about the same noun happen in different place. So there you see the context most of the time, because they change for different reason, and the capturing the reason is basically looking at the verbs. It's very simple, but it's very powerful at the same time. That's where event storming shines, because there you have to put a full sentence, because you go away from create customer and update customer. I don't remember who said this, maybe you, Matthias. Like if I can create customers, I would reach in an hour because I just run a loop of 1 million and say I create 1 million customers and force them all to pay me $1 million each. And then I'm just a billionaire in the time. The create order, create customer, how simple is that, right? You don't create your customers, they need to come to you. Then you find a bit better word and then you start seeing it verbs. It's like what I actually do. And then you see fallacies and you see assumptions like Michal said, and you see a lot of misconceptions about different things. Why the customer needs to be updated. Like the customer never update themselves. They need to do something. They want to do something, right? So that's where event storming shines. That's where I like personally event sourcing. I'm a big fan of that. Then you capture the behavior, you persist the behavior, you can analyze the behavior. And that's a lot of contextual things that come up to the surface straight away. So that's just, yeah, pain.
Yeah, thanks. That's a hard thing. And then next question will go on to that. But before we go to that, we have Trond and Don up next. So Trond, go ahead.
Yes, actually, this is a bit anecdotal, but I think it's common. I'm actually triggered by what Matthias said, because I've been working in old backend system for, which they are 20 odd years old, all of them. And you have this system, old system effect there, of course, but you also have intermediary in between the old stuff and the new stuff. There was a period when they tried to make these canonical data models. And we have all this ESB legacy and all that stuff. So they had tried to create a language, but it's common, so it's useless, right? Because it's not contextual, it's common for everybody. So there they have a really sort of terrible ubiquitous language, if you like. And getting it out of that is tricky, because then there's a lot of investment in that language. A lot of people have to sort of invest a lot of their careers in this language. So this is probably what you were saying, Alex, that this is a dungeon keepers, if you like. But a technique I found to be useful, which we have used the last couple of years, is story mapping or user stories, forcing everybody, including the business, because the business was also affected by this corrupted language, if you like. So they also had this twisted idea of what the things meant, and they start looking behind what. So the words lost their meaning, right? Because they were just names in the end. So forcing them to change the perspective of what would the user expect this to be. Why would they change? As you said, Alex, the customer doesn't want. They don't want to change. They don't want to do something very specific. So try using the language of the user. That's to trigger something, at least with the bot of the developers and the business where I am at now. So we have changed a lot of those core words. We have dropped them actually because the customers don't use them. So we adopted the customer words instead. And I actually personally also think that there is something from object orientation, I believe, is that we should create a system that sort of matches the user's mental model. And the user here, you should find the user's ideas in your code, I think. And that creates another dimension that can break you out of those old patterns, I think. At least we have had some success with that.
Yeah, and that relates also back to what Matthias and some others said earlier, I think. Right, we need to step out of the current ubiquitous language, maybe move on. Yeah, I had businesses go in explaining me, I want this table to be changed, right? And this was a person from the business doing business stuff. So I think that's even worse. That's even harder to change than if you have people not communicating with you yet, because that's easier. But yeah, that's more my opinion. But maybe Dawn, I saw you raising your hand before we go to the next.
Yeah, so off of what Trond said, it's all about where you're relating. So it started with the objects. That's low level in the system. That's understood by developers, maybe architects. Then you raise it to the business. The business has their own language, but it's not the language of your customer. And more importantly, and I think it was showing up in the chat, it's not the purpose of your customer. And Indy talks about this a lot. And by framing it in its purpose, then it relates to the widest audience and the most relevant audience who's going to use that stuff, which is your customer. You're not making it for the business. You're not making it for developers. You're making it for customer. Hopefully they make some money and some profit and solve a problem. So I think what's happened is two things. With understanding and things becoming commodity, I have no idea how my electricity gets generated, and I don't care. All I know is how much does my meter say I've used, and that's what I pay for. I don't care if it's copper or whatever they've used it to pipe it to my house, whether it's above the line or below. It's not something that anyone is going to make decisions about. And so therefore, what's the thing that's important? What's the context, if you like, that is important for your customer and where there's value, and start there. And I find a lot of my job as a designer is bringing that into the conversation and figuring some of that stuff out and talking to clients and getting my product managers and my developers and everybody in the business to talk to clients and start from what are they trying to do? What is their need? What is the problem that you're solving? So whilst that's not a DDD thing, again, I think this is where that overlap is starting to appear, and general intersection between what developers have been trying to do, which is solve problems without the information and doing it just from a technology standpoint, and now including the person who that problem is being solved for. So I think it's a natural, almost organic evolution. And remember that corrupted language that you're talking about is 10 years old. Nobody speaks the way that they do 10 years ago. So it's not so much corrupted, it's just missing, or there's a delta that needs to be evolved. That's the way that I think about that.
Cool. Thanks. That's a nice insight there. And to go on that, right, because we were talking about language again, and let's see if anyone wants to raise his hands on the next question is, how do you get teams new to DDD to adapt that ubiquitous language? Or maybe what are your heuristics? So I've got to rephrase it. What are your heuristics to keep people on track when they notice when a language is changing? Or because that's not what generally happens, right? People do one modeling session, they maybe design that language, but they're not really witnessing then in between all these other conversations, the language has changed. So what heuristics are there when people continue to break the ubiquitous languages conversation? So anyone who wants to raise their hands and start off. Alexei, go ahead.
Can you repeat the question?
I just, again, pressed it.
Yeah.
Because
no,
nobody else was raising their hand.
Yeah, so for Romeo, the question is, what are your heuristics in your experience if people continue to break the ubiquitous languages conversations, right? Usually you have one modeling session where you create maybe or design that ubiquitous language together, but then in all these hallway conversations, you break it constantly because people are not focused that they're in a modeling session, but actually hallway conversation might be modeling sessions as well.
Not enough modeling sessions then.
Yeah, so yeah. Alexei was first, then
Romeo is raising
also
his hand, so yeah.
Go ahead, Romeo.
What I want to, I was first.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, then you go first, and then Romeo goes second.
Yeah, I don't observe this actually, that people deliberately violate the language. So what Don said, the system's are 10 years old and language is 10 years old, there is definitely a gap. So people sometimes already use a different language. At the same time, of course, people get used to things that happen that are working in the system. People that are hands-on with the system, that tend to use the language of the system. That's kind of inevitable. But at the same time, when they get and talk to customers, and the customer support, for example, is an invaluable source of information because they usually speak to customers using their language. They of course, if you give them tools that speak the language of the system, they will kind of interchange it, but you can still get it. So developers often struggle with ambiguous terms, implicit terms, and all the assumptions. So they have this urge to use a proper language consciously, maybe most of the time unconsciously. So you just need to bring it in. It's an exercise. It's a kind of muscle you need to train in them. So when someone say, again, a user, meaning customer, a mechanic, a supervisor, whatever role you have in the system, which may be implicit or something else, and they actually may be talking about identity, my answer for that is, what are we talking about now? Can you elaborate? In which context are we now in? So basically trying to bring people inside a context, because the term, again, I often see this tendency of, I even had a person on a meetup trying to like promote this idea of holistic design. We need a contextual design. People try to separate terms. Like if we talk about customer in this context, we cannot use the same word anywhere else. That's just plain wrong. You can use the same term. You just need to clearly identify in which context you are. So it's not as often as broken language, is that it misses the context, it misses the contextual definition. It's like, where are we now? And then as soon as you see this conversation and you try to guide people, or you actually not try, you do that, you just say, okay, wait a moment, what are we talking about now? In which context are we? And then things just match. It's like a puzzle, just boom, fits to place. And it works. People understand what they talk about, usually. Not all the time, of course, but that's what people do. People don't like to have implicit meanings, especially developers. They want to have everything explicit. You just need to like push them a little bit. That's at least in my experience.
Yeah, and grow that muscle of hearing language change, right? Yeah. So Romeo, you was raising your hands. Go ahead.
So it enters the problem of enforcing, right? If I see people not doing the ubiquitous language a lot, I consider this to be a very good opportunity. Usually, I feel every point where ubiquitous language is failing a lot is probably a point where I'm not seeing some discrepancy that shows a limit to the current version of the ubiquitous language. For me, this is a very frequent source of discovering new Bowden context that I did not know before in my life. It's very frequent that people are a little bit peeved that somebody else is using this language wrong. That peeviness here is a good entry point to follow some rabbit hole and end up discovering a new Bowden context. So my approach here is to ask myself, am I missing about that context? Am I missing about that context? This happens a lot to me when I do event storming, and I have different businesses, and people start having struggles using the same ubiquitous language. Then I question the initial hypothesis of, is this really ubiquitous?
Yeah, so that's the question that you ask. Why is the language changing?
Exactly.
Right? Why is this language changing?
Why is the language changing? Why is it changing so much? Yeah. Okay. Is my current model of my Bowden context enough?
Yes, correct.
If it's changing so much, maybe people really care about this other way of telling this. And if they really do care about this other way of telling this, maybe there is a reason.
Yeah. Thanks. Alberto.
Yeah, I wanted to add a coordinate here, because the dynamics of the language are really different if you're thinking small organization versus large organization. In a small organization, you might realize you have multiple bounded contexts, but it's the same team taking care of all of them. And they might freak out because the same people are having a conversation, and I say customer, and you meant that customer or the other customer. So we might try to flatten the language so that there is no ambiguity in the conversation between the people. While in a larger organization, you might get into the point of this other team is getting the language wrong, and actually the other team doesn't care about your language. They're talking about a different problem. But the driver here is a group of people is trying to remove ambiguity from their own conversation. They just don't say like, you do the thing and then you do the other thing and finally you do the other thing. Am I clear? Doesn't work like this. So we try to give names to things, but single team, multiple bounded contexts will fail to see the boundaries many times, or maybe they see them. They will try to tweak the language so that they don't have this ambiguity in their conversation. And larger organizations, the dynamics are different. So it's all about where are you? Single team, very large organization, dynamics are changing.
Good, thanks. And then Kim is up.
Okay, so we are talking about first using ubiquitous language. As my experience, this scenario is quite often appear in old team, especially the legacy system works for more than 20 years. So in this scenario, most of the people were not aware of what they are talking about. So sometimes at the first journey on the basis flow exploring, or perhaps we are using event storming to start weekly classic event, which is well aware by the team. At the first time, I would always ask them, try to expand what else happened. And they can describe all the flow, all the concept, and all the keywording at first. Then at this time, I would ask them to write down a few key contents as the glossary, which is a good work to have the same page for the understanding. As the time goes by, there are a couple of content or naming conflict for now. And I always tell them to ask them to have a positive attitude. Try to answer why the meaning of the name has a different definition. What's the concept are quite the same, which party of them are not. And then if you can figure out the differences is valuable for your situation, then perhaps you could have another new concept of the modeling. If no, perhaps all of your understanding perhaps were wrong, and you need to go back to seek for other assistance to help you to go through the entire process. So I always try to use these two steps to force them to have the same understanding for the one concept. Perhaps it's not a great one, but it's forced our team or all of attendees to just focus on if you could know the things with the same process, with the same concept, then the definition is just work for your team because nobody knows all of the history and know all of the definition for a couple of years ago. So that's my approach.
Thanks. So that glossary coming in there.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks. Alexei.
Yeah, I just remembered my observations from a recent acquisition. That we kind of the company, my company that acquired this smaller company, we suddenly discovered that the product of acquisition, the same line of business, but it looks better, and and sometimes it works better. They have a lot of flaws, but still, and then a lot of challenges come from inside the companies. Like they have just 5-6 people, but they used to be 10, and we have like 60. Why are they moving so fast? Why are they building better product than we do? And by looking at the nature of the thing, I compare it with my previous experiences working in smaller companies. I think I figured it out. I think nobody wants to build intertwined ball of mud. So what happens is historically, like you have 2 or 3 people, maybe 4, start to write a new system. And like Alberto said, for them, everything looks the same. It's the same customer everywhere. It's the same driver, the same car, whatever else in line of business. And then they build a system and they build a holistic model for everything. And it just works. And they can move really fast for a period of time. And then they hire more people and they grow from 10 or 5 to 10, and they still work as one team. And then they suddenly grow, they get an investment, they grow to 200 people. And they work on a single holistic intertwined model. And these 10 people still know what's going on, but the rest 90, they kind of have no clue. And what happens, we have conflicting changes in the code base, conflicting changes in data schemas. We have conflicting intents because then people start consciously or unconsciously, explicitly or deliberately or not, work in different contexts because it's just inevitable because the business grows and the contexts appear and merge. The contexts are not fixed. They're never fixed. They might emerge. They might disappear. And then this thing just doesn't bloody scale. And that's what people don't realize. They just think they throw 10 times more people into the thing and it will move 10 times faster. Okay, we know that there is no mythical man months. Everyone knows this, so we will move 5 times faster. But actually, we move 5 times slower because we just grew so much and we don't have contextual boundaries anymore. And the model just doesn't work. So sometimes the better approach for this, just fire these 90 people, keep the small team, and then you will probably move as fast as you were before. Alternatively, you are forced to define your context properly. You're forced to identify things that actually mean things in context. That's where transition happens from small organization, like Alberto said, where everyone knows what it means, to a larger organization when a single team that works in a single context knows what it means in their particular boundary. But unless this happens, it's just recipe for disaster, it's recipe for failure. It happens all the time. There is not a single system, not a single one, where you have a group of 100 people divided to 10 or 20 teams, working efficiently on a single model that actually able to deliver something. It just doesn't work. I've never seen it, and it probably, you name it, you probably have better experience, but it just doesn't work. And sometimes for business and for management, it's very hard transition because they just don't understand it. They just don't get it. Think it used to work. We have more people, we have more teams, we have more capacity, we have more resources. So it should be faster.
Back to the resource. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So throw more resource, we have more manpower, let's just do it. So what's the problem? Why this small company that we just acquire moves much faster where they have a lot less people? And that's the that's the thing you need to tell them. This model does not scale.
And usually they don't look at that language, right? Because more people is more communication, and they don't look at the communication lines.
Exactly, communication. And again, if you work in a single context, in a single model, there is not only just communication, there's a lot of conflict, and there is a lot of coordination. That's what we all try to avoid, right? So we need alignment. We don't want coordination. We have gigantic releases. We have big banks that after that nothing works. We have enormous changes because everything depends on each other. And the only thing that can be delivered is like all the 20 teams go along one single moment, because no single service was with an isolation from the other service, because they all need to go together. It just never works. And that's very hard to convey to the business because they just don't realize this. They think just linear expansion of the capacity will bring them almost linear or increase in productivity.
And there's not enough. Yeah, and I think there's not enough data yet to support that growth in a way, right? So thanks. So Vladik.
I think it is enough data. It's just, I think it's just a lot of the level of ignorance to that particular problem in the industry is astonishing. It's just true. It's hard to believe, but it's just true.
Yeah. Thanks. I totally agree with that one. Vladik.
Yeah, so I wanted to add a heuristic, albeit a negative one. So if your domain experts are using database keys in their conversations, either consider that battle lost or have a lot of patience, because changing that language is going to be hard. And I faced that situation a couple of times. So in such a situation, what I would suggest is just being that language cop that overlooks all correspondence, all conversations, do some code reviews, make sure that your code is speaking the language, make sure the documents, whatever, uses the correct language. But eventually, at least in my case, what eventually solved that issue was high turnover of people in the organization, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so being the benevolent language cop, putting your foot between the door. Thanks. Don, before we go to the next question.
Yeah, so it's interesting because everything you guys are saying is like, I know what that is. We have names for that. We have tools for that. I could have told you that for free, that would be a problem. And my bells are going off in my head. And I put a little equation in the chat. And when you have, if you think about gases, Brownian motion, what happens? There's more energy with the expansion. That energy has to go somewhere, but it doesn't go into productivity. It goes into communication. You don't handle the communication problem, then all the things, I think I made the statement earlier on, if you ignore the people and you ignore emotion, then it's going to come and bite you in the least, most inconvenient way. And we even have theories about this from design. When you go from a small group up to 10, you have to change your communication. Up to 50, small agency is the next boundary. After that, then you are in systems of systems. And some of these things I'm saying are systems thinking that a lot of you guys are familiar with. But this seems to be something that happens with human communication. And some of this we've done empirically because we've observed it. And we're not just observing users, we're observing ourselves, we're observing our partners. And some of this has just been from experience. So we have tools for this. So come and borrow from the designers, from the HCI. Aminata, I'm sure there's something that you can say regarding this, but this is what we do every day, as well as looking at product and doing all the scenario maps and service blueprints, which I call sequence diagrams for people. All of that is to address the potential for miscommunication, which will cause chaos and entropy. So whilst I'm not talking about DDD, I'm saying that that pain point that you have, there are tools for that.
Yeah. So can you paste the tool so we can link to it on the Euro board?
Yeah, I will.
And we can borrow. Thanks. So we're hitting the 2-hour mark, and I think I have 3 more questions I want to go through. And the first thing is, let's see who can answer this, but why did the need for DDD arise? So Eric isn't here. I see Rebecca is in the attendees, but maybe someone else knows. Where did the need for DDD come up? So who wants to answer that one? Still no raising hands. Okay. Christina, you're up. Where do you think?
I cannot tell why it arose at that time. It was too early for me to know the context, the bounded context. But I think I have an idea why it is so high up now. And this is because our world becomes computerized through everything. You cannot do any. In 10 years, it was an explosion of need of software. And the other companies, the big companies sitting on 10 years old code, have the same need because their code is not a big ball of mud, but it's something totally broken in a very, very often. And actually, this is not my idea, but I think either Fowler or Ken Beck has talked about this. That now we are in the age where all the company needs a terrible need to refactor and to reorganize and redesign their code, and they don't know how. And the business is become so complex that finally the people understood that we build software for business and not for us or for machines or something. So this is why I think this is the reason why everybody is looking for DDD.
Thanks. Yeah, so I have Dominic who asked a question. I will allow to talk now. So you should be able to talk now, Dominic.
Yes, do you hear me? Hi.
Yes.
I don't know, cam is not working. Okay. Yes, that was actually the point where I wanted to go with that question, because I see it mostly the same, perhaps with a little bitterness inside, because I see so many companies which actually don't know how their company works, how the different departments are working together. And in the last 10, 20 years, they just built some kind of software. And now they are in the situation, oh, well, wait, there are other companies which are doing this much better than we are. What can we do about this? So this is actually where I think mostly DDD can help them to understand their business better. For me personally, it is an anti-pattern, call it as you like, if you make a distinction between IT and business, because it's the same. There's no process in a company right now where software is not keeping the company alive. Yeah, that's just
Thanks.
what I wanted to say. Thank you, Christina.
Yeah, keep hanging because we have Alexi next up. But
if I'm allowed, I would have said one sentence, but I can.
Yeah. Okay. Now, so I see Rebecca who reviewed the book, just to bring that in before Alexi, and she's saying It's because object modeling was a big new field and Eric wanted to focus on patterns for modeling, not just technical patterns. And he spent several years reviewing the book in progress. So that's a bit of background. But let's first go to Alexi, then Vladik, and then Christina, you can react. Dominic, I'll keep you in, so maybe you can sometimes react if you want. So Alexi.
I think the reason for recent DDD gaining popularity is, funny enough, it's the, I hate to bring this word, but some things that happen in the industry. So first of all, microservices, right? I see Alberto laughing. The funny thing is, what happened is, I feel like, yeah, microservices, so it should be less than 300 lines of code. And we said it's bullshit, right? The next level is, okay, we expand this, so it needs to go beyond that. But where is the boundary? What is this module that can put in production, isolated from everything else? Then people started to search for answers, started their kind of journey to find those things. That's what John talked about multiple times, and capability-driven, business capability-oriented microservices boundary and stuff like that. So I think, interesting enough, there are circles of evolution of the industry, and we come to this next level where we solved a lot of technical problems that previously were seen like unbearable. We can deploy in production in no time. We can spin up elastic resources in the cloud in no time, and almost at very little cost, taking them up and down. But then we fail to utilize what these capabilities that the industry itself brings to us, how we can utilize it to write better software. And okay, people spin up 1,000 microservices and they all couple together. So from monolith, you went to distributed monolith, and things, instead of becoming easier, they suddenly become much harder to manage. So you bring a lot of complexity, additional complexity of the cross-network communication, a lot of APIs, and a lot of chatty network calls. I remember someone, I don't know who that was, somewhere on NDC, maybe John, you remember. Someone told the story that a big company redesigned their system to microservices, and they built about like 200 microservices. And they had a big launch, and they never tested the system altogether. And they bring it up online, and the homepage was loading for 10 minutes because all the microservices were talking to each other. And it was a huge disaster. So unless you understand where your boundaries are, then you won't be successful in your cloud journey. You would never be successful in your microservices journey. And also, the industry grew in terms of that. In 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we have not seen companies with 50,000 developers. They just didn't exist. We had small shops and we had bigger shops. They were working on the same system, maybe in the single business, like working for a particular insurance company and only them. And then software started to be commoditized. We have much more multi-tenancy software as a service, cloud-based software, basically commodity software that we take for granted today that didn't exist before. And this forced companies to grow. They hire more people, like I said, and then they start to get in conflict. They start the coordination. They start to lose speed, basically, and business start to question why the hell we're moving so slow, and why our smaller competitors are so fast. Yeah, because they have less people. They probably have kind of laser focus on something in particular in a single context. That's why they have no coordination burden. That's why they move faster. And they probably have less managers. That's one of the things. So that's just inevitable. I think it's that cannot go any other way. We call it domain-driven design, or what Uber called recently domain-oriented microservices. They invented the things suddenly this year, although we talk about it for 10 years or 15 years. So it's the same ideas, different names maybe, but just that's how it is. And we will have to grow on this. Otherwise, the companies that don't adopt this, they might find themselves successful at the start, but inevitably when they start to grow, they will fail. It just doesn't work.
You are muted.
Ah, I was muted. Now I'm off. No, Vladek, yours up.
Yeah, so what I wanted to add is, in my opinion, the need for domain-driven design was defined in 1968, and I'm talking about the software crisis. This term was defined way before we had domain-driven design, microservices, or even personal computers or laptops. And if you look at the Wikipedia article on software crisis, you will see many of the properties that we are struggling with today, you know, with companies that what you're calling a feature factory. So projects running over budget, projects running over time, software very inefficient, software of low quality, etc. So in my opinion, that problem existed for way too long. It's just, you know, as both our industry and maybe, you know, as our whole world advanced and software started eating more and more of the world, then that pain became more acute. So we started feeling it a bit more. And in my opinion, that also explains why domain-driven design was coined in 17 years ago, or 18 or 17, but it started gaining popularity, you know, as Alexei said, with the invention of microservices and distributed systems, where they just became the usual way of doing things, and cloud computing. That problem, that pain just became more painful. These are my 2 cents.
Thanks. So Dominique, was your answer question to?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. So before some of us get hangry here, I want to add, I want to go to the end of the last question. And that last question is, how can we make this all more accessible? So there's a lot. So looking at 2021, that there was this thing, what we all discussed here, all the social, technical, social, and going in, going out, and how can we make this all more accessible to people? And Matthias, I saw on the Twitter feed, and you're already raising your hand. Go ahead.
It's my pet peeve. The question assumes that things being more accessible is always a good thing. Nobody asks, how can we make heart surgery more accessible? Why not? Because it's very complex, and because we don't trust people with it who haven't studied for 10 years. I'm not saying DDD has to be that. I think it's a good thing.
But we totally should make heart surgery more accessible, right?
Well, yes and no. Not in isolation, right? In a context where we can, you know, create robots that can do it or something, and you just have one in your home, sure. But then the robot is more complex to design, and we wouldn't allow anybody to allow design the robots. I'm not saying it has to be this way, but I'm saying that DDD is very explicitly, right? This is the one thing we should never disagree on. Is it's on the cover of the first book. It's an approach to tackle complexity in the heart of software, right? Complexity is complex because there are no easy answers. If there are easy answers, it wasn't complex to begin with, or the easy answers are wrong. You know, the line, there's always, for every problem, there's an answer that is, what's the line? It's simple and...
Simple, clear, and wrong.
Yes. So so the main goal of DDD is not to be accessible. I'm not saying we shouldn't make it accessible, but the main goal is tackling complexity in the heart of systems. If we can do that better and scale that, etc., by making it accessible, sure. But we must resist the temptation to make it accessible as a goal, because then the only outcome will be that we'll dumb it down, right? It's how to make CRUD in DDD. So accessibility as a property that enables something else, yes. Accessibility as a goal, no, right? If somebody writes, here are the 5 easy steps to do design, then they're selling you something, but surely they have not dealt with the actual complexity of design, which is trade-offs.
Why would be uncomplexity synonymous to accessible?
No, I'm saying that the risk is if we make accessibility or chief goal of this community, we will reduce everything to the point to make something accessible. It needs to be simple, right? It's Steve
I
Crook.
disagree with that.
Okay, maybe I've read too much Steve Crook then, but there are many things about DDD that are unnecessarily inaccessible. I totally agree with that. Yes, we should find them. We should find better ways to explain them, and we have been doing that, right? Modeling is hard. What Alberto has done with event storming has given us tools to make it easier, to make it more accessible, right? I can get started in a modeling session with people who have never done it in 5 minutes. That is a huge boost, right? We have the notion that your design should be modeled after the problem, right? The design should look like the problem. So instead of technical solutions, etc., you have a problem, a design that looks like the problem space. That has become more accessible thanks to event sourcing, in my opinion. If you combine these two things, modeling events and then designing a system using events, and it's all using the same language, it's magic. I think the world still underestimates the benefits that this gains, the accessibility that this gains, because event sourcing is still very young. But there's a bunch of these things happening, right? And we are trying. Nick Tune is making, and others are making the bounded context canvas and things like that. 15 years ago, there was, well, Eric was maybe teaching some classes, but there was nothing else. Now there's a plethora of classes and meetups and this sort of stuff. So all of this helps to make it more accessible. Not everything will be successful. Some will be, too much on the side of oversimplifying and reducing it. But we must keep in mind that complexity is always going to be hard and painful and require deep insights and many trade-offs. And there are no true answers and there are no easy steps, right? As long as we can keep that, we should keep working on accessibility. But it's not the goal of the community to make DDD accessible, because that would lead to nothing, right? We know, we have the example, right? The scary thing that we should always keep sort of in the back of our minds when we're trying to make something like DDD accessible is look at what happened with Agile, right? Accessible, sellable, all the ullables lead to suboptimal results.
So next year we have a pineapple bounded context canvas certificate, right? Just the inside joke. Yeah, so thanks, Matthias. I believe I agree. Pleasure. But let's see, Aminata. Aminata, sorry.
No problem. I don't know if I.
Good that you said so.
No problem. I don't know if I understood it right, because Matthias said so many things. I hope I can get the point what the question was, but. I think we can make things more accessible. Well, coming from my perspective, from the product and user experience side, I think we can make the things more accessible to other people's when we can come to the point where we can cross our topics in the community. So we're just talking about domain-driven design and the developer community, and I don't know why it is like this. So the first time when I heard about domain-driven design, it was when I discussed with Mikael, and it was for me something like, oh wow, this happens in the software community. Well, it's great. It's fantastic. It's fantastic for me as a product person to have such a thing. Yeah, to work with that we can work together, because this is also my topic to talk about communication, to talk about the same thing and stuff like that. But when we just are focused to talk about our topics in our communities, we cannot make it more accessible to every person. When I'm just talking about user experience with user experience people, user experience is not more accessible for people in other communities. So I think we should start talking about our topics in other communities to tell them what are the advantages of this practice, and to tell them and to guide them. It's good. It's you should do this because it's not a developer topic. It's something you should do for your company and for your product, because we are talking about products, because talking about digitization, and to be focused on the advantages of domain-driven design, but also in other communities, and to say it's not a developer thing. It's a thing for us to make better better product, to make better things. So this is my point, where we can make it more accessible to spread it within all communities, not just exclusive for the developer communities.
Yeah. And I totally agree, and I think the approach there should be not to say we're going to teach everybody DDD. Well, for example, if I'm doing a session with different people, there's maybe, you know, executives and product and engineering and different roles in there. I'm not saying we're going to do DDD. I'm not even saying we're going to do event storming. I'm just saying, well, it seems like we could visualize this using, you know, let's visualize the events and add stuff. Is that event storming? Probably not, according to any sort of, you know, rules that people would think there exist. Is it DDD? Maybe, maybe not. But I'm not trying to explain that. I'm just saying, let's try this thing, see if this gives us some benefit. Let's do more of it, and then people can start, you know, maybe ask questions. Okay, what else is there like this? And then you can sort of gently introduce people into DDD. That improves accessibility without trying to change DDD. It just creates more ways into it, which sort of ease people into it for the things they need, as opposed to trying to, here's this big blue book that you need to read that has a lot of stuff that is maybe very abstract. So I think that helps with the bridging of communities, in at least in my work.
Yes, yeah, that definitely, but we don't do this. So, you know, so there's no DDD presentation and a user experience meetup or something like that. Do you know what I mean? We don't do this, and if we don't do this, we have a problem. Also, talking about technical architecture things in digital product meetups or something like that. And this is the point. Or talking about user experience in a technical meetup or something, event or something like that. And this is very important to cross our topics, to tell them all, you have to understand everything, because we're talking about digitization, we're talking about projects, we have to talk about the whole experience for the user and the user needs. And this is what you have to be focused on when you develop. You have to think about for who. Yeah, you have to think about it, because it's very interesting for who you develop your things. You have to think about your business model. What are we doing? What do you want to do? What are the things I'm working on? Just fit with the business values or business target or something like that. So this has everything to be together, and this is the point where we don't it's not good how it works now to cross all our things and our topics. So this is I think we can do more with that.
Something I have been trying to do with the DD Europe conference. We've managed over the years to bring in more people from sort of analysis, from testing communities, but we've never sort of product. I think Sophia is probably the closest we have of somebody, you know, from that community speaking at DD Europe. I haven't succeeded in that because I don't know enough people and I don't know enough about it. And consider this an invitation for in the future, Dawn and Aminata, to maybe help me think about that and bring product into DD Europe, or vice versa. I don't know enough about the events and meetups, etc., for the product community. So maybe we can come to you as well.
Yes.
Right? Oh.
Yeah. Please.
Good. No. I was just. I thought the conversation was done, so I wanted to go towards a wrap up. Or is anyone still wanted to add some final words to this final question? And I think it's a great invitation that we need to keep working on crossing the chasm of these communities, right? So
just to interrupt, Kenny.
Yeah,
the question was, how do we make it more available, DDD? My first question back would be why? What's its purpose? Because if it doesn't serve a purpose, why would you make something widely available? And I think, Matthias, you touched on this a little bit in terms of don't just spray it everywhere indiscriminately, right? And if nothing else, I think what will happen is that all of these different things, just like Aminata said, are facets of the same thing. We're just looking at it from a different perspective. And when you bring them all together, then they make that whole thing. That in itself will be another context, but it's an operational context. And I think what's happening is that those facets just getting closer and closer and closer and closer and closer. Entropy is being squeezed out of the system and coming together. And I think that merging will also help us to work out why, who needs to do what, where. And that's some of the things I'm going to take away from this conversation and be thinking about in terms of your comment, Matthias, about, okay, what is the overlap? We have to work that out, at least work out how to talk about that, and then work out how you merge that together. It's not just throwing spaghetti against the wall. So
and the risk with this is always when merging two things, or when you have a model in your head and somebody comes with a different model, right? You have your models, I have mine, is that we look at what is overlapping, what is similar, what is just like that thing in the other model, and we ignore what is different, because this is Daniel Kahneman, right? It's system one is just dropping things in the, oh, this looks like ubiquitous language, but we call it that, so it's the same thing, right? We need to look for what's different, and that's where we'll learn probably some very interesting things.
Great. Thanks. I think that was a nice wrap up for 2021, right? See how we can start creating this. So I would like to thank everyone in the panel. Usually we do an ending question, but I think there's been already enough content for people to go on to today. So I would like to thank everyone in the panel today, giving your time. And I would like every attendee to give your thoughts, questions, and insights. Now I'm going to close the YouTube stream. And because Romeo broke the rule today as a first time, once we close the YouTube stream, he will sing some Spice Girls for us. So thank you very much. Have a nice holidays and see you next year, and bye-bye.